All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to the April meeting of the League of Women Voters of Manatee County Natural Resources Action Team. I'm the chair, Randy Miller. The meeting is open to all, and if you're not a member of the Manatee League at this point, we'd love to have you. And you can learn more about us at our website at lwvmanatee.org. And there's a link there giving you the opportunity to join if you wish. Our meeting topic today is low impact development and how it can protect Florida's waterways and strengthen community resilience. Stormwater runoff, carrying nutrients and pollutants from roads, rooftops, and lawns, remains one of the greatest threats to our surface waters. LID, low impact development, offers practical science-based strategies that work with nature rather than against it, and practical experience-based strategies to affect change at the local government level. Our speaker, Dr. Laura Wilson, will introduce techniques and infrastructure that slow, filter, and absorb runoff close to where it falls. She will also share insights from her conversations with municipalities about their stormwater challenges, what solutions are gaining traction, and how residents can become strong advocates for LID in their own communities. Inspired by the natural world, Dr. Laura Wilson pursues work that brings together her love of learning, teaching, and exploring. She earned her BS in geology from Washington and Lee University, MS in earth sciences from Montana State University, and PhD in geological sciences from the University of Colorado at Boulder. She joined the Marine Resources Council, which is on the east coast of Florida in Palm Bay, as executive director in June of 2024. With a background in paleontology, she brings a big picture approach to restoring our ecosystem, looking at how water, wildlife, communities, and policy all connect. She emphasized using sound science to guide decisions, build strong partnerships, and foster a culture of continuous learning so that together we can create lasting improvements for our environment. If you have any questions or comments you want to make, we ask that you please put them in the chat and we'll bring them up at the conclusion of the meeting. So with that, Laura, I will turn it over to you. I think you're still on mute, Laura.
Okay,
There we
there we
go.
go.
Start over.
Now, can everybody see my screen okay for the third time? Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and or at least online, and get to share some of my experiences, what I've learned. I'm going to cover a couple of different topics at kind of different levels of depth. So feel free to ask questions that might be more detailed than I give. Or, if you really want to delve into things, I'm happy to do any sort of follow-up on kind of both techniques in municipalities as well as techniques that we can do in our own homes and own yards. So I am going to talk about low impact development, but even though I just got a fantastic introduction, thank you very much. I want to just introduce myself a little bit. So actually, I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, but I got my start as a scientist, I'll say, down here in Florida. My family, we would go to Ponte Vedra just below Jacksonville every summer, and my parents went there. I grew up going there, and that's really where I fell in love with the ocean. And I fell in love with kind of the outdoor world and exploring it. And my first love was actually sharks. My dad and I would wake up early in the morning and we'd go hunt the beach for sharks' teeth. And my first passion was I wanted to be a marine biologist and specialize in sharks. I then took a 25-year detour, 30-year detour into paleontology. So I got really fascinated in old things and old sharks and dinosaurs and things like that. Um, and kind of got degrees all over the country, ended up as a professor and curator in Kansas, studying ancient marine ecosystems for almost a decade and a half, and then have been able to find my way back to Florida and back to my love of modern marine ecosystems. Still go up to Ponte Vedra Shark's Tooth Hunt, meet my parents up there, and get to take my family now. But I've always had a huge connection to the ocean, and the more time I spend in academia and working with students, I just had a feeling that I needed to do more about the state of the world today and not kind of always be looking in the past, but be looking at the present and the future. So I'm thrilled to be as part of the Florida environmental community. I am executive director of the Marine Resources Council. We are an environmental nonprofit that is dedicated to protecting and restoring the Indian River Lagoon. We've been around since 1983. We were started by a group of Florida Institute of Technology professors that were concerned about the decline of the health of the Indian River Lagoon ecosystem. And we've been working on these problems ever since. So I know I'm on the opposite side of the state, and I'm not sure how familiar people are with all the different estuaries that we have. But this is the Indian River Lagoon and its watershed. So that slightly darker orange is where all the rain that falls on the ground drains into the Indian River Lagoon, or as we call it, the IRL. It's 156 miles long. So it's a very long, thin estuary. It's about 40% of Florida's east coast. So it's a very significant portion of the coastline. And the lagoon itself 156 miles long, but the watershed is 2,284 square miles, so is maybe a little bit larger, about the size of the Tampa Bay watershed, and significantly larger than the Sarasota watershed. People around here colloquially call it the river. And that's fun, but it's technically not a river. A river, by definition, flows downhill under the effects of gravity, and the IRL doesn't do that. It's largely a wind-driven system. That's where the energy comes from. And in the north, we really don't even have tidal systems. We have maybe 4 inches of tidal shift a day, where in the south parts of the lagoon, the tidal shift is a little bit stronger. But usually it's wind that's causing our mixing. We are North America's most diverse or most biodiverse estuary. We have about 4,400 species of plants, animals, and microorganisms that have been identified. We're finding more and more microorganisms every day. But around 50 of these are either threatened or endangered or state listed species. So there's a lot of species of concern that use the Indian River Lagoon as habitat at some point during its life history. We recently came out with a new economic study on the economic impact of the lagoon. This was released, I think, in November of last year, and it has a $28 billion per year economic impact. And that's looking at everything from recreation and tourism to property value to ecosystem services, the value of having clean water and habitats that keep that clean. So there's a huge impact across the lagoon for uh, our economic status as well. Really, the easiest thing to say about the Indian River Lagoon is that it is a very complex system. And really, you can say that about any estuary where you have to have all of these different factors, from what the water does in the atmosphere to what the water does onto the groundwater, the sediments and the rocks through which our groundwater is draining, the life, and then you add humans on top of that. And other things that make it a little bit more complex for the Indian River Lagoon, because it is so long, we cross different climate zones. That's one of the reasons why biodiversity is so high, that we're both subtropical and tropical. And there are 7 different counties and, you know, dozens of different municipalities that all drain into the watershed. So it's not really even kind of one central place of having the policies to help protect it. And then there are also very different problems in the north versus the south. The north, we have the focus of the space industry and the effects of that. In the south, there's a lot of worry about Lake Okeechobee discharges, what's coming down the the rivers there. But at MRC, we try to tackle as many of these problems that we can. We're very small but mighty in terms of our activities that we do and our reach. Our mission, our headquarters are in Palm Bay in Brevard County, but our mission is the entire watershed. So we impact all 7 counties that surface waters drain into the lagoon. We have a couple of different places where we stand out within kind of the ecosystem of other organizations working on the Indian River Lagoon. We do shoreline restoration. A lot of organisms or organizations do that. We're mangrove people. So we raise and plant mangroves and provide those across the state. We're water quality people, so we do extensive water quality monitoring, and we have for 3.5 decades. And then we translate that to the public in reporting. And then we're stormwater people, and this is a place where we really stand out compared to other nonprofits that work in kind of the environmental sector in our area. And then at the heart of all these things, we have the public education and advocacy piece of where all these activities combine. So looking at some of the stuff we do with shoreline restoration. So we do a lot of green infrastructure, but we've also started working a lot with gray-green infrastructure as well. So combining both nature-based solutions with human-engineered solutions, because nature-based solutions are best, but trees grow a lot slower than hurricane season comes. So shorelines sometimes need a little bit of a helping hand from that human engineering. This is a project that we actually did on our shoreline in Palm Bay, where we worked with a new company to put these manufactured breakwaters in, and actually built 10 feet of beach behind these breakwaters. The breakwaters used to be all the way to the water level used to be all the way to the line of trees, and the cliff behind was collapsing. And then we went in and we've planted mangroves behind. So we were able to build beach, which the horseshoe crabs now use for spawning, and the biodiversity is increased both in terms of what's in the sediment and the health of the sediment, as well as the birds and the fish and the marine mammals that we see there. And one of the things that we do that's a little bit different as well is we do extensive monitoring. So this is a site where we actually collected 2 years of data, both before and after the installation of these breakwaters. And our scientists looked at not just how the sediment thickness changed, and not just how the water quality changed, but also how the sediments themselves, so the microorganisms or the worms and crustaceans that live in the sediments, how that diversity changed with different treatments. Breakwaters, trees, breakwaters plus trees, nothing, just sand, to show kind of actual quantify the effect of different sort of shoreline restoration solutions. And that's been very impactful to take into the community, to work with municipalities, and to work with homeowners on what the best solutions are for their shoreline erosion and storm resilience. With this shoreline, like I said, we're mangrove people, so we operate one of, if not the largest mangrove nurseries in the state of Florida. We have about 10,000 trees at any point between our two nurseries, one down in Indian River County and one in Brevard County. Yes, our mission is the Indian River Lagoon, but our nursery actually expands that. We send a lot of mangroves over to your coast. We have a delivery coming up and a planting of 33 5-gallon mangroves. So these are 5-foot trees over in an HOA on the West Coast in the Sarasota area. And we've actually started doing a lot of work in the Keys. So we're working on some big restoration projects, both with HOAs. We do take on private clients, which is an important revenue source, but also something different from a lot of nonprofits. And then we also work with municipal restoration projects as well. So our trees go all over Florida, and honestly, they go all over the world. We sent trees to both California and Arizona this year to go into aquaria. And kind of some of the science behind this as well is there's been a pathogen, a group of three fungi that are negatively affecting mangroves. And so we've been working with scientists at the University of Central Florida to study and actually develop a treatment for helping our trees become more resistant to these pathogens. And we've been the test nursery, so the research nursery for the research on this pathogen. So now we not only sell mangroves, but we also provide mangroves that have been treated for more resilience. The disease, you can kind of think of it like shingles in the sense that it's in the body. So it's in 80% of our mangroves, but it doesn't really manifest until there's a stress event. And we see that same thing in the mangroves. And then our treatment is it doesn't cure it, but it does give the trees more resilience and resistance to the disease. I mentioned water quality monitoring. So in 1991, we started the first water quality monitoring program across the lagoon. We use citizen scientists. So these are volunteers that we train in data collection. And, it used to be back in 91 when it started, the state of the art research techniques was actually using chemicals and wet chemistry. So our citizen scientists were out there doing titrations to get the salinity and using all these fun devices. We've actually recently, over the last year, updated it to use digital probes and other methods. And this is because this is what the state standards are. So now that we're using different methods that are approved by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, our data can go into statewide databases that are used by scientists for research and used by policymakers. So we're actually able to now contribute those citizen science data to a standardized database, which is really, really cool and makes their effort a lot more impactful. So we don't just collect the data, we're also really big into reporting it. In 2016, we started doing Indian River Lagoon report card, kind of giving out grades. I know that Sarasota Bay and Tampa Bay do similar kind of annual reports on the quality of water and seagrass and things like that. We revamped ours in 2024 to do more of a digital dashboard talking about overall lagoon health. So turning it into more of a health assessment than a report card. So you think of it like you go to your doctor's office and you get a blood screening. You're not just getting one factor, you're getting a variety of factors. So we report on 6 different parameters of water quality. We talk about how seagrass is changing. We talk about the number of wastewater spills in each basin, the number of harmful algae blooms, how salinity changes. So we look at a bunch of different metrics to bring it all together. Since we started doing this in-house, we can actually go back and we can compare using the same methods. So applying science to look at how different factors are changing over time. So this is just looking at 2024 to 2025. And we can see that at least on a basin scale, there were improvements in the central part of the basin where we've had the most problems in water quality. I don't want to flood y'all too much with data kind of as we transition into the low impact development, but I do want to show, so this is from our 2025 report that we released in November. And this is the 5 different basins of the Indian River Lagoon going from north to south, just looking at water quality. So we look at pH, so how acidic or how basic the water is. That's really important for things like our shellfish. If the water's too acidic, they can't grow their shells. We look at turbidity, so how clear the water is. If the water isn't clear, you're not going to grow seagrass. Total nitrogen and phosphorus, so these are our nutrients. Too much nutrients can fuel algae blooms, which then cause fish kill events and seagrass die-offs. We look at dissolved oxygen, so how much oxygen's in the water to support fish. And then our chlorophyll A, which is a measure of how much algae are in the water. And all of these reds and oranges are looking at our total nitrogen and total phosphorus. So these are our nutrients. When we talk about pollution to the Indian River Lagoon, or really to any of our estuaries, any of our coastal systems, we talk about nutrient pollution. So that's the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus. So what's in our fertilizer? If fertilizer helps our grass grow, fertilizer is also going to help algae grow in our surface waters. So that's the main pollutant that we talk about. But another pollutant to an estuary is fresh water. So these systems are brackish, it's a mix of fresh and salt. And if you get too much of an influx of fresh water, that can be really harmful to these organisms that are adapted for salinity for saline systems. So especially things like clams, oysters, seagrass, the critters that live in the sediment but provide a lot of kind of healthy sediments for plants to grow. These things can't swim away and relocate when conditions are bad. So if conditions are bad for too long, they die. And we're seeing that with oysters. If the water stays too fresh for too long, they either die or they can't spawn. So when we talk about freshwater pollution and nutrient pollution, the common connector between these is that they both come from land. So this is where our stormwater comes in. So the source of both of these is stormwater for the most part. Wastewater also plays a role, but stormwater plays a much higher percentage into where the nutrients are coming from and where the fresh water. So this gets into the question of what can I do? What can we do? So last year, I launched a new campaign for Marine Resources Council called Low Impact Living. And it builds on low impact development, so responsible stormwater management, by acting on all levels. So, yes, we address the municipality side of it and the elected leader side of it, but also working with individuals, with homeowners, with renters, with community groups, HOAs, and then all the way up to that government scale. Um, I'm gonna, hmm, I'm actually gonna switch. I want to add one more thing. So I'm gonna switch something real quick. I'm gonna stop sharing real quick. And I'm gonna pull up a different slide. Let's see here. Just real quick.
It's never where you think it is.
I know, right? I thought I had it on this computer.
Yeah.
But I can get it pretty quickly. Um, there we go. Okay. So, as I mentioned, this low impact living, it's really a education and advocacy branch of, building on low impact development. So when it comes to low impact development, we're talking about stormwater management. There are other names. A lot of times it's synonymous with green stormwater infrastructure, GSI, or nature-based solutions. It kind of goes through different phases of names. And the essence of it is how to keep stormwater where it falls so that it soaks into the ground, gets down into our aquifers, and isn't running off our land, picking up nutrients and becoming a problem for either someone else or our surface water bodies. And so it's using on site natural features as well as engineered features to protect water quality. So it addresses problems of things like stormwater related flooding. So if you have more opportunities to water to soak into the ground versus run off of impermeable surfaces, so things like our typical concrete and asphalt, then you're not going to get as much surface water flow and flooding within our communities where we have a lot of pavements. Through this, we can also protect water quality and nutrient loading. You can use both hard engineering, so things like baffle boxes that collect stormwater, let all of the solids in it settle out, and actually can have a filtration to filtrate out some of the nutrients, or kind of more traditionally, the biological engineering, so using plants. Plants need nutrients to grow. If you run your stormwater through some sort of garden, some sort of bioswale, then those plants can slow down the water, soak up the nutrients, and allow that water to soak into the ground. And then with it as well, it allows for the retention of more biodiversity because you're preserving the natural plants that then support the insects and the animals after that. So you have less habitat loss. And we talked about freshwater in terms of runoff, but the thing that's not talked about enough is the aquifer. So 100% of Floridians get their drinking water from the aquifer, so from the groundwater. And if we don't allow water to recharge the aquifer, then we're going to run out of drinking water. And how recharge happens is from the surface. And so our surface water, which comes from rain, storms, sinks down into the ground and slowly percolates or infiltrates down into these aquifers. And so to be able to slow the water, allow it to sink down into the ground, you can then get your aquifer recharge, which is really important for us who like to drink fresh water. So it addresses these sorts of problems with a variety of solutions. One of the things you see a little bit less, but is starting to pick up a little bit of speed, are permeable surfaces. So rather than having traditional pavement or concrete, you can use permeable pavers that allow water to move between the actual pavers because you don't have a caulk in there or a cement in there, or actually pervious concretes and asphalts that allow water to sink through them. Bioswales, so using nature along roadways and low places to help collect those stormwater. So that's what this upper left picture is. You actually have a storm drain and water flowing off of the street into this garden to allow for the plants to do their thing to remove the nutrients. Baffle boxes, that's his bottom left. So these are fitted to stormwater systems before that stormwater discharges into surface waters. So whether it's a bay, a lake, an estuary, the ocean, it allows it to filter out trash and nutrients. And then also rainwater harvesting. So you can put these big retention areas or exfiltration areas underneath parking lots, underneath roadways that actually capture the water in those rather than having runoff. Um, Other solutions are things that use more of the nature-based solution, just like preserving trees. They're really, really important for stormwater, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And something that you don't see in Florida as much as you do in maybe Europe or Asia, though I've seen some in Chicago, are things like green roofs. So turning roofs into stormwater capture rather than stormwater runoff by putting plants on them. So a great example of this on a municipality level is this is in Cocoa Beach. This is the Minuteman Causeway, and this is the kind of the pre low impact development retrofit that went in, and you can see it's just very drab. It's all asphalt, and not a whole lot of excitement there. And then they actually put in low impact development. So they put in pervious pavers, they put in tree boxes, they put in bioswales and rain gardens. They have this huge exfiltration system, so water harvesting underneath the intersection. So they can actually store 190,000 gallons of stormwater underneath the road that previously was draining immediately into the Indian River Lagoon, but now it gets captured and it can infiltrate down into the system. And so then there's also kind of a beautification that goes with this well as well. And they're getting more foot traffic, and restaurants now have outdoor seating. And so it's also been a boost to the local economy for people that live in these areas. Let's see. I'm going to switch back over to the other presentation now. So this gets back to what can I do? So this is great on the municipality level, but we don't all have that power to make the rules, to say where budgets are going to go. We have our voices, but not as much. And so this is where that low impact living comes in. So for us, this is a four prong kind of four post campaign of educating the public. So things like this talk and other talks that we do, empowering citizens to work together, advocating for change ourselves, and then demonstrating how. So if we start with educating the public, this is really turning low impact development techniques that happen at a municipality or a development level and taking it to our own backyards. So the power of using native plants, the idea of being cognizant of what goes down our stormwater drains. If you put grass clippings down the stormwater drains, those are just going to run into your local water, break down, and cause nutrient pollution. Most coastal areas have fertilizer bans on the record for during the rainy season to keep those nutrients out of our waterways, to even being able to retrofit our own driveways and concrete areas around our houses with pervious pavements and using something different than just concrete. So this is kind of the messaging that we get across. We do a lot of tabling events. We do a lot of face-to-face talks, but we've really tried to kind of up our infographics and online outreach because we now have every generation gets their information from a different source. We still have people that watch the news and read a newspaper. We have our Gen X and our elder millennials that use Facebook. We have our young millennials that use Instagram. We have our Gen Z that uses TikTok. So really trying to get information to all of the different audiences, which is getting harder and harder the more media techniques that are involved. One thing we've done, the whole idea behind this is the idea that everybody can have an impact, no matter who you are, whether you're a kid, whether you're a family, whether you own a home, whether you rent a home, and that we want everybody to see themselves as part of the solution. So we started making these checklists, which have been very, very popular. Empowering citizens is really working on the community level and, through both education, but helping them find their voice within their HOAs, their community organizations, and whatnot. So these are actually two different presentations that I've given to HOAs or made for HOAs to talk about living shorelines and why we need plants and not seawalls on our shorelines for resilience and ecosystem creation. And then actually doing the same thing along ponds, all of our retention ponds that we have, that it doesn't have to just be an ocean or an estuary solution, but we can use plants to fix problems. And one of the things I'm working on is trying to find templates or create templates for people to use for their HOAs and things like that. Advocating for change. And so this is working at kind of an elected official level. We've partnered with Ferguson Waterworks, who is a producer of a lot of the hard infrastructure and gray-green infrastructure for low-impact development. They're the experts in the room, but we set up meetings all across the watershed to talk with different communities about what's working, what's not working, where they're gaps in resources are, and be able to provide our networks and our resources where possible, whether it's an education campaign, whether it's getting them in touch with a grant writer, or a variety of other things. One of the things that my colleague and I at Ferguson has done is we go to municipalities, everything from sitting down with resiliency directors to parks and rec to city councils, and talking about the positive impacts for low impact development within communities, for helping with our flooding issues, for meeting their nutrient load requirements and targets, um, for ways of adding tax revenue and maximizing the land that is developable. If it's going to be developed, then maximizing it with LID, so that we can have these nature-based solutions that are also contributing to the economy, and then also just enhancing urban corridors and that beautification aspect. We also host an annual low impact development conference. Um, and this is a place where we can bring together a bunch of different stakeholders. We have cities, counties, we have developers, engineers, we have companies that make products, and then we have a lot of citizens that have started coming. And usually we have a couple of student groups as well, to learn about stormwater problems and solutions. And the coolest thing that's been about this conference is that we've been able to move from how to plan LID projects to actually presenting completed projects and the effect that they're having. And our last pillar of low impact living is demonstrating how. And this is using different properties that we own and manage along the Indian River Lagoon to kind of show different low impact development green stormwater techniques. So the first picture is actually from an island that we own off the coast of Melbourne. It's a spoil island, so it was just a bunch of sand that was piled there when they dredged out the boat launch. And it became one of the remaining 6 wading bird rookeries in the Indian River Lagoon. But through erosion, it was reduced down to 3 trees. So we've worked with a bunch of different partners, both government and non-governmental. And what you see in the picture are breakwaters that we just put in. And then fill was put in behind those. And so now we're supporting huge bird diversity. We have 10 big 10-foot tall mangroves that we just planted. And then as the sediment fills in, we'll be planting up to 100 different or 100 smaller mangroves on the island. Sebastian, this middle star, is where our major our biggest mangrove nursery is. We also have passive recreation trails. We do a lot of invasive species removal, and we'll be putting an education center on that. And then in the Southern Lagoon, we work with the town of Jupiter Island and do their land management. So last year we removed 10.5 acres of invasive species and then planted, over 500 native plants back in their place. But kind of our pride and joy for demonstrating is our headquarters in Palm Bay, where we can put a lot of these kind of home scale, home level practices in action, everything from native plant and rain gardens to living shorelines to retention pond management with buffer zones. The bottom left hand, we have some floating wetlands out to help soak up the nutrients as well. And then they also actually provide a great ecosystem space for both our birds, but also our pond alligator, whom we love very much. But I really want to focus kind of the rest of the talk on just 2 different pillars on this. I want to talk about the advocating piece, and I want to talk about the empowering and kind of working at the citizen advocacy level. So this first piece is really looking at what I learned talking to municipalities over the last year. So I talked about how I've partnered with Ferguson Waterworks. We go and we meet with municipalities, and really it's just a listening session for us is how it starts, is we want to know what you're doing, what's worked really well, what the struggles are. And there were some really interesting things that I was able to take home out of this. It was really interesting. The first meeting that we held was with the resilience director for Palm Beach County. So, where like West Palm Beach is. And they made a really interesting comment that the county commission wasn't going to approve funding for anything that wasn't tried and true. And that makes sense if you're going to be, in a fiscally conservative area, then they want to make sure that the money they spend on works. And then the next meeting we had was up in Cape Canaveral with their resiliency director. And that department up there has been given a pretty long leash. And they love to be experimental and innovative and on kind of the cutting edge of working with some of the new technology and solutions. So for me, it was interesting to have that juxtaposition of some people like to be pioneers and some people need that proof of concept. So this means that we really need to look at efficacy studies. So we're just starting to get into the idea of what works, why does it work, how does it work, how do we know that it works, and how can we use that to create best practices for some of these stormwater problems. So this is our shoreline again. I showed this picture earlier of where we installed breakwaters. And this is just 100 days out. So you can see kind of that same set of trees that has the red line on it in the before picture. So the water was going all the way up to the edge of the cliff. And by 100 days later, we'd been able to accumulate almost 8 feet of beach behind those breakwaters. And this optically is great, but my science team was out there and they were actually measuring the changes in sediment accumulation, how that changed through storm season and after storm season. They were measuring changes in water quality. And then also looking at the biodiversity. So I showed one of these earlier, but on the left is pre-installation, on the right is post-installation. Same time of the year, so seasonality shouldn't affect them. But this is just kind of the changes in the size of the bars is the changes in biodiversity. So the changes in number of species, essentially, um, between treatments. So putting in breakwaters, we planted 130 mangroves behind those breakwaters. And so just being able to build ecosystems and add kind of the native plants to it were really, really important. So we need more of these types of tests for those groups that want that proof of concept. But that means that we also need to share. So one of the big points, everybody we talked to had no clue what other organizations, what other counties, or what other cities were doing. And so they don't know if they're reinventing the wheel and there's something that's already out there. If they need proof of concept, they don't know what concepts have been proved. So there's this need to share what we're doing with other people. So I pulled a couple of examples from our conference last year. So this is a story map, kind of a LID database from the city of Titusville, so up in northern Brevard, of all of their different low impact development or water quality improvement projects that they've done along the lagoon. The city of Palm Bay also just launched last year a story map where all of their green infrastructure, so where all of their baffle boxes have gone, all of their community gardens, things like that. And then in Brevard County, we have a half-cent sales tax that we've applied to ourselves that goes into our Save Our Indian River Lagoon fund. And so there's a database of all of those different projects, what the nutrient loads, what the number of people affected are for that. So people are starting to create databases of their projects, but we're still at that point of how do we get the word out? How can we share this so that we can learn from each other and we're not all working in a vacuum? One of the interesting lessons that I didn't really think I was going to have to learn, probably because I taught this in college for 12 years, was the water cycle. The idea that rain that falls on the ground is related to the water that we drink, which is related to wastewater, that all of these things come from the same source and recycle through all of these different systems, wastewater, stormwater, and drinking water. I was down in Indian River County at an integrated water um, presentation, and the department that was presenting this integrated water management plan was only talking about wastewater and drinking water because stormwater was in a different utility division. And so the financing was completely different. And wastewater and stormwater had different budgets. And so the group that was presenting the integrated water plan did not mention stormwater. And everybody that was in the room had major problems with this because you can't separate that out. If 100% of Floridians or the people in this municipality get their drinking water from the groundwater, and one of the goals in this integrated water management plan is to ensure that there's enough drinking water for population growth over the next 25 years, you have to make sure that water is recharging into your aquifer. And that's going to be coming from your stormwater. And so, this idea that all of these different water systems are connected needs to be taken into account. And this is really, really difficult when your utilities are split up into different departments and different budgets at the municipal level. And then this one's a little bit more intuitive of communities that are making advances and pushing things forward are communities that are investing in that. So again, I know this is Brevard centric, but this is what I know. Two of these examples. So City of Cape Canaveral has, like a 5-person resilience department that has really been given free rein to take on projects as they need to. They also do a lot on the city's social media. So they're pushing a lot of their projects and their successes and their plans out into the public, which is really cool. The example from Titusville, so I'll talk about in a second. Titusville has an incentive program for developers to adopt LID into their new development. And to support this, because it is optional, it's not required, they actually hired somebody specifically that intercepts these applications as they come in. And then she goes and sits down with them to talk about how they can apply things like previous pavers, bioswales, saving trees, preserving old oaks, how they can use that for incentives and kind of kickbacks into their program. And then, as I mentioned before, Brevard, we have a half-cent sales tax. So we voted 10 years ago, we voted to tax ourselves to create what's now a $500 million fund to put towards infrastructure projects for the health of the lagoon. So now I want to transition into kind of this advocacy part. This was something I started thinking about, the request of some of our very vocal advocates that work with MRC that just wanted to know what they needed to be speaking about when they went to a city council or a county commission meeting. So I put together a list of kind of advocacy points for low impact development. Then there's a variety of low hanging fruit versus higher hanging fruit. The lowest hanging fruit is requiring native plants. Florida already has requirements to put in, drought tolerant plants or native plants. And, this is really low hanging fruit. Florida, we love our tropicals. I get it. Florida friendly landscaping, a lot of people have problems with it because it does allow for non-natives, but they're non-invasive, they're low water requirements. But Florida friendly landscaping also has landscape design that goes with it that helps direct water off of problem areas and allows it to sink into the garden areas versus the lawn areas. St. Augustine grass that we love, depending on who you are, can't absorb any water after an inch. Everything after an inch of rain just runs off, just like it would on concrete. But you can still have these beautiful yards, even with this Florida-friendly landscaping. And then some of the requirements would be to require 50 plus of new plants to be native. Manatee County, you're actually at 30%, so you could do a little bit more in terms of native plants. But you can just see the difference in the root mass. Those are plants that are absorbing nutrients. They're holding our soils into place. They're allowing that water infiltration versus our turf grass over here on the left. Along with the native plants, there are different types of native plants, and those are the go along waterfronts. So things like living shorelines versus seawalls. Seawalls are the most destructive shoreline armoring that we can do to the ecosystem. They completely separate water life from land life, and that blocks a lot of different plants and animals from living in those habitats because they need to be able to go back and forth, or they thrive in these tidal areas, and you don't get that with a seawall. Seawalls also cause scouring at the bottom, which deepens the water levels, which means you're not going to grow seagrass. There's nothing for things like oysters to anchor onto. And then they eventually fail because they erode at the top and behind. So adding living shorelines, these plant-based solutions, is kind of an easy fix, especially if there's not a seawall or it's time to take one out. I pulled a couple of examples. This is a Brevard County. We have a barrier island action plan. And just last fall, we were able to add living shorelines as a best practice into this. That they are encouraged or required to do nature-based designs. Vero Beach, so a little further south of us, also has both a estuary and a coastline required buffer zones. So things that we're using native plants that are going to stop that runoff from your lawn before it hits the surface water. So again, using native plants. And hopefully this is coming from all of us. So in March of this year, the governor actually signed Senate Bill 302, which passed bipartisan unanimously, both the House and the Senate, for coastal resilience. And this requires the DEP, so the Department of Environmental Protection, to establish statewide permitting and best practices for nature-based solutions, and really moving away from those seawalls that have been going up for decades. And using green infrastructure or gray green versus hard armoring everything. So rather than throwing riprap on it or throwing up a seawall. So this is huge that this passed, and really, really good news. Like I mentioned, we are mangrove people, so I have to talk about the power of mangroves. Have to talk about the power of mangroves. We have a lot of mangrove haters out there. They're scared of them. They don't want them on their land. They block their view. They think they can't touch them once they go in the ground. They are hugely powerful for both storm surges and storm energy, as well as nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon. That a hectare of mangrove forest removes like 3 times more carbon than a hectare of rainforest. And you can touch them. You can actually, between 6 and 10 feet, you can pretty much do whatever you want to other than cut it down. So if you're worried about your views, we're trying to do a lot of advocacy right now to talk about you can hedge your mangroves at 6 feet once you plant them. And so they're still preserved or performing a lot of their ecosystem services. They're making that habitat. They're protecting your shoreline, but you don't have to worry about a 20-foot tree sitting in front of your property. But this goes for our retention ponds as well, doing buffer zones around. So everything from like a 3-foot no mow area around a pond that helps grass clippings and helps helps keep fertilizer out of that pond, which then causes algae blooms and fish kills, to having kind of the best of native plants, having the shelf of the pond planted as well with wetland plants, so that you can have these beautiful ecosystems. So this is actually part of our buffer around our stormwater pond, at the Lagoon House in Palm Bay. We've just done a couple of fun little experiments with within our own HOAs and done some water quality testing on buffered and non-buffered HOA ponds, showing that the buffer zone alone is reducing the nutrients in nitrogen and phosphorus by 50%, which is really, really cool in terms of an effective barrier. Another kind of easy no-brainer solution is tree canopies. So rather than having one tree per yard, which is kind of a mandate in a lot of development codes, putting your trees together into a green space. Tree canopies can intercept anywhere from 25 to 35% of rainfall. So that's rain that's not even going to be hitting the ground to run off. It hits the leaves, it runs down the stem or the trunk, and then goes into the ground. I've heard numbers that one live oak can hold up to 10,000 gallons of water. So they're huge reservoirs for water. And then they're also preventing erosion. And by slowing down the water, allowing it to sink into the ground, this is where we're getting that infiltration down into our aquifer, which is so important for getting our drinking water recharged. This was a cool graphic that I found looking at. So, this is a hackberry, but also not just planting trees, but preserving trees that exist because bigger trees and older trees do a better job. That shouldn't be surprising, but they store more water and they intercept more rainfall. And so they have much more protective power from stormwater related flooding in neighborhoods. My fourth point is investing in infrastructure upgrades. So we're starting to see wastewater treatment facilities being upgraded to advanced wastewater treatment facilities,
So,
which,
only in the interest of time, we got to wrap it up shortly.
okay,
So, okay,
yeah, no
thank you.
problem. Yep. So, adding extra steps that remove more nutrients, things like septic to sewer conversions or septic upgrades. So we have 2.6 million septic tanks in Florida, and all of those are discharging collectively about 426 million gallons of wastewater into our ground per day. So that's not a great that's a problem. Um, and then another one is the last one that I'm going to talk about is making LID techniques best practice. That applying these techniques into a home, into a new development, into a business should not be more burdensome than not doing so. And there are a couple of different things. So some of this is just enforcing what's already on the book, like fertilizer bans. We have a new stormwater rule that'll be in effect 2030 to remove even more nutrients from our stormwater. Or some great examples of incentive programs where developers can actually get kickbacks if they put LID techniques into their development. Um, so I will stop here. This is kind of where we are with our low impact living, our road show. And thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I could listen to you all day. That's really, really good stuff. A couple questions. We can go a couple
Yeah.
more minutes here, but one of them has to do with the IRL, which has made a
Yeah.
lot of news for, bad seagrass health and starving
Hmm.
manatees and so nutrients. And yet, how do you sort of reconcile, you're doing a lot of great stuff. And
Right.
compare that to the things that you read.
Yeah. So I mean, it's we are making improvements. I think that's the important point. We have seen quantifiable improvements in seagrass and water quality data. Um, I also always allude back to the Chesapeake Bay, which is kind of setting the recovery bar for all of us down here. And the Chesapeake Bay didn't start seeing any improvements for 35 years until after they collectively started kind of these mass infrastructure and policy changes. In the IRL, we've been working on this for 10. So we have a long way to go, but we are seeing improvements. It's always going to be cyclical, but it's an investment for the future, and it's just changes that have to be made. And we spent 100 years messing it up, and it's going to take more than 10 to fix it.
Yeah. Mangroves, you only grow red mangroves or you other types also?
We grow red, black, and white, which are the three native plants. Most of our restoration with reds, those are the ones that like to be in the water. Um, they're easier to propagate, but they're also really slow growing. So if we plant a 5 foot tree, that's a tree that we've had to raise in our nursery for 5 to 7 years.
Hmm.
Blacks and whites grow a little bit faster, but they are a lot more susceptible to tidal influences. And so they're a little bit harder to get that like plant husbandry down.
Okay. Um, and let's see. So do you work, a lot of what you're doing sounds similar to what like waterkeeper groups do. Do you interact, we've got Suncoast Waterkeeper, Tampa Bay Waterkeeper. Do you interact with the waterkeeper groups at all?
I do actually. So our former board chair, he's still on our board, is the Indian River Keeper. Um, and the North St. John, St. John's Headwater, just got a new river keeper, and so we've started to work with her. We work with our water management districts. So we have a lot of really good partnerships. I went to a advocacy workshop in Tampa last month, and there are probably a dozen different water keepers there. So we're pretty active with the groups.
Yeah, good, good. Um, and when do you do any lobbying? I know you're
Not
501(c)(3), so there's some limitations there, but
Yeah, so it's been a little bit on and off in our institutional history. I haven't done any on the Tallahassee level. I definitely meet and push low impact development, green stormwater on like the county levels. But not too much on the legislator other than kind of adding our name to funding priorities and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, but I know that that's somewhere that our board wants us to grow, or my board wants us to grow.
Yeah, yeah. All right, it's a little after 6. We try to keep it, to about an hour. You got lots of great ideas that I'm sure we're gonna probably get back to you on with questions or
Yeah.
see what we can do about them. But the idea of trying to get to 50% for, native new plants, and having somebody from the county or municipalities work with the builders on
Hmm.
LID solutions and things for us to explore and learn more about and just see how much we do with that already or not.
Yeah. And I think one of the hardest things in Florida, and granted, this is my only experience with it, so it could be this way everywhere, is that like counties and cities are at the same level. So there are a lot of, in terms of kind of power for land development codes and things like that. So there are a lot of county ordinances that are really good for LID in terms of tree preservation and native plant coverage and stuff like that, that aren't required by the city, even though the city is part of the county. They're usually less strict, and so there's a whole lot of inconsistency even with one county over what these requirements are. So it's a lot of different stakeholders that you have to bring to the table to get even county-wide changes.
Yes, indeed. And Mary Lynn can probably attest to that. She's on LMAC here in Manatee County, which is environmental lands.
Okay.
I can't remember what all of it, but anyways, dealing with a lot of these kinds of issues.
Hmm.
Well, obviously you're very passionate about this, and we really enjoyed having you spend time with us,
Of course.
and helping us crystallize, I think, some of our thoughts and see what we're going to try to do with this. So,
Great.
and feel free to reach out to us. I know you're trying to sort of, get
Hmm.
involved in other areas of the state. So, if there's any way that the League of Women Voters can help you with that, certainly
Okay.
made it to the county level, by all means, reach out to us. It'd be
I
great.
would, yeah, I definitely will. Thank you so much for that.
You know where to find me. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much. We're going to wrap it up here and say thank you for everybody for joining us and have a good rest of the evening. Thanks.